Today, I'm speaking with Evan Abrams, a motion designer, director, and educator. If you're at all involved with motion design and you've ever been on YouTube, you've probably seen Evan's videos. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, been on there for years, exceptional education on motion design in both 2D and 3D. And he also does a lot of Adobe live sessions with Carl Hamrick, who's also been on this podcast. We talk about a whole load of things, including teaching, communication, the process of idea all the way to render, the way that you work with concepts and design within motion design. We also touch on the idea of the craft of motion and all the different parts of Evan's skill set, the art of learning. We then dive into tools, talking a lot about After Effects and its position in the industry compared to other tools, and a little bit of talk about the future of the industry and the role of AI. As always, you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen, and please reach out or connect with me on X to let me know what you thought of the episode and who you'd like to see on next. Thanks, as always, for listening, and here's Evan Abrams. So I want to start with a question about the kind of two-sided nature of your work, at least as I see it, which is the communication and the teaching and the actual craft of motion. Have you always been interested in and doing communication? Have they always gone hand in hand, or did one come before the other?
Well, since we're on video, I can go grab a prop to explain.
I'll play some cheesy jazz music while we're waiting.
It's all right. It's pretty quick. This is my diploma about my BA in communications, so I love it. So it's good times. But I don't usually do prop work on these things. But so in terms of teaching, I'm kind of a reluctant teacher. My history with teaching, I originally never wanted to do that, but I had to do it at a pretty younger age. I used to be, you know what, this is a digression, but it's fine. It's helpful for the story.
We love tangents.
Yeah, so tangent number one. When I was very young, I was put into martial arts because of my hyperactivity and violence towards my older brother. So I was placed in martial arts, which would be useful. Progressed through that pretty quickly. So by the time I was in high school, I was already in Taekwondo, you're like a first degree black belt, and the kind of translation of it is assistant instructor is what comes with that. So despite my dislike of teaching people, part of the thing is you have to teach the white belts and the younger kids. That's part of what it means to be of that rank in the school. And so I had to teach people. I had no interest in it. I didn't like it. I was a snobby teen who was bad in those ways. Showing people things, annoying. I want to win. I want to win tournaments. This is taking up my time, right? But doing it, I got a much deeper appreciation of the stuff. Right. And then I was like, you know what? This actually rules. But by the end of a year of doing that, I was like, this is actually fun and good to do. So that's kind of where that began.
So you recognized pretty early that it's the teaching that helps the doing and vice versa, obviously.
Well, definitely. In order to communicate something or to get someone who doesn't know how to do it, no matter what the it is, it doesn't matter. You have to have a very fundamental understanding of what the thing is, right? If you can't really perceive of the thing, or not totally versed in the why of it, if it's purely a mechanical application, we could not consider you an expert in the thing, right? There is a thing that a lot of people who are good at doing are not great at teaching, right? Because they do not break the thing down. They simply internalize the process and repeat it and go with it. I say simply, but there are people who are fantastic at the thing, right? But great players don't necessarily make great coaches, is the big thing about that. Because there is a level of meta understanding that you need to know not only how do I do it, how does it work such that someone else could do it, right? You have to be able to see the same thing from many angles. Generally, that means you have to break it down into kinds of analogies or into just different ways of seeing and understanding. And as you take on different ways of seeing, you yourself will begin to appreciate and see the thing in all of its various facets. Be it, doing a roundhouse kick, the most basic of kicks, you break it down into its various steps and it becomes, an incredibly refined object as you do that. Or if it's moving keyframes around, right? These are similar refinements to a craft that you really only get when you go super hard into the mechanics of how they go, if that makes sense.
Do you find that it ever gets mixed up in your mind, the kind of like the teaching mind that needs to break things down into like categories, topics, principles, layers, and the kind of playful, sort of more like jazz-like mind of someone who's just exploring something?
Not really. So, and the reason I say that is because I am bad at music, but I do love jazz, right? I love to listen to jazz. It's my favorite thing. Improvisational jazz, beautiful. I've started doing improv comedy because I'm that kind of twisted, I guess. And we might say, when we look at it, an outside observer might look at the thing and say, oh, they're just playing, right? They're so relaxed, they're so childlike, blah, blah, like that type of thing, right? They've tapped into a pure mind, right, that is unhampered by all these rules, man. But in reality, they have internalized the rules to such a degree that it appears effortless to us. So I'll use the improv comedy analogy because that's pretty useful. That these people are just making up a thing between each other. True, but they understand between them rules and conventions to seek out the game of a scene and to highlight of each other this thing. It appears effortless. Sprezzatura, the effortless ease of the thing. And for me, an incredible fundamental understanding of the craft is almost essential to play well, and especially to play well with others, right, is really important. That we both need an incredible base level understanding of this stuff. If you are super solid at the basics, right, if you're super solid with your principles, if you can digest things into their component parts and then reassemble them, everything becomes play. Because you have no stress about the things that are coming at you in these moments. So a client comes to you with a piece, it's very abstract, it's very nebulous, right? You can't play with that unless you can break it into Lego bricks and do stuff. Otherwise, it's all these problems. Instead of, I see these problems, let's have fun with these problems, right? Like, I kind of bristle often at the idea that all you must do is free your mind and the rest will follow. That's a lyric. Someone let me know later what that is. But, you could do that. But I've seen children's drawings on fridges, and a client would not buy that, right? Because they're playing, they're all over the space, but you kind of have to know the rules before you subvert the rules, if that makes sense, right? Like let's say you get someone who's an improv jazz player, right? And now here is a dog. The dog doesn't know anything about jazz. And so they have the freest mind of all, right? They've never even heard of jazz. They don't know what music is, right? They can't improvise jazz together, right? It's not contributing to the jazz, right? So zero knowledge.
I beg to differ. My dog, when I was doing my grade 8 jazz saxophone, would always...
sorry.
So, some dogs are musically educated. But yeah. Let's talk about normal dogs, not my one.
Yeah. We're gonna leave the good dogs alone in their corner with their trombones and their trumpets and all those things. I don't know how they get the embouchure on those. Anyway, so when we try to translate this idea into our creative work and that type of thing, like, you must know how keyframes and motion are going to move something. You must know sort of leading the eye, right? Get away from the technical, I touch this button, it does this. This series of effects look like this. Whatever, right? That the programs are going to change, the craft is going to change. What is at the core is, can you break this problem down into constituent parts and make something out of it, right? Can you see this from the angles, and especially now in our more modern environment, where you kind of have to bring several tools to the thing, even being able to say, okay, this section is best done in 3D, this section is best done in 2D. You're going to be able to play in that if you're comfortable in those zones. If your mind is simply free without anything to grab onto, you're falling, you're not flying. Right.
So I want to get to this. I have a question just to lead up to it, though, which is about your craft and your journey, right? We touched on a bunch of really interesting topics here, and one is like, I guess you could look at it like the art of learning, really, where with something technical and creative, which is why I find motion design so interesting, and music similar as well. There's a lot of steps, so I'm interested in how you found those over time, how you found your skill set evolving, and what you see it as now. And yeah, that's the first question, really.
Sure. So my beginning was doing following, right, is kind of the thing. So I was very fortunate that I ended up on a co-op placement out of university, whereas most people in the communication program, Evan indicates off screen to the diploma that is out of frame. Most of the people in the program would go on to journalism and PR and stuff like that. I personally thought I would get into advertising because I really liked the ads in between the cartoons, and the cartoons themselves were ads, and I found that very nice as a child. And the world was confusing. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to understand the world and to sell people stuff using your understanding of the human mind? Anyway, I got put into a co-op placement for Army Multimedia, which I'm in Ottawa. I went to Ottawa U, so pretty normal to be doing work for the government and the military specifically. And they were a news program. So if anybody out there works in news, it's that. But people are allowed to yell at you more, and more than usual in the news environment. And that type of a space was a lot of editing stories, light graphics work, and eventually they were like, hey, your resume says After Effects on it, right? Like, yes, I did put lightsabers on things in high school. You are correct. And so they had me do a bunch of other sort of slowly building up. But all of that was very directed. We've got these rigid things, you need to accomplish them, which is pretty useful to someone sort of learning, because the kind of meta stuff of translating, you've got a big idea, let's turn it into a really concrete thing, is hard when you lack the tools to do any of that, right? And it kind of gets lost in the middle in there. The other thing that was great about that is, as an Army place, it's incredibly process-driven. So we have a structure. We will work these things. In order to arrive at news broadcast, we first have this giant grid of information that we will populate with objects. And then those things themselves are representative of a grid of things. And then that will be populated with completion until this box is done. And then this bigger box is done. And then that's done. Like, it is a lot of like, do the little things in order and we get to the place that way. So when I ran through there, like, I did graphics work, I was an editor. They brought me back on as a PA for a stretch, which was very informative with process, because you see the stuff behind the stuff that is lost, or at the time was maybe lost. Maybe people are more about it now, but there was a world of process between nothing and something, right? That is unglamorous. Some would say totally uninteresting, but essential to making the thing happen. Anyway, after that, I sort of really enjoyed being able to break stuff down and, make stuff out of the Legos. And, I started freelancing pretty much right after kind of the 3 years with that. Poorly, I might add, because still I'm leaning on somebody else's process that has been created to produce a certain type of thing. And now I'm producing a different type of thing. I need to develop, out of survival, a type of process that will reduce the amount of waste. And waste in this sense is time. And time is your life. And you're going to run out of it if you don't manage it. And it sounds scary, but it's liberating to have control over these aspects so you stop wasting them. And that will eventually lead to sort of more freedom as you are able to compress stuff and then expand other areas that will be more beneficial to you. So having rigid process informed by the yelling people would eventually bring me to having stuff that works. So the idea that clients are going to come with you they know nothing, right? They have a desire, they want a thing. Maybe they got some notes, maybe they got some colors. They could have nothing at all. They could just have desire. And from there, you will elicit from them and you will produce the various phases that will become something. And even if you're only creating this process work to communicate between you and the client and the future you and the future client, by which I mean the same person at a different point in time, that stuff is still incredibly valuable to keeping things on track and moving in a certain direction. So anyway, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's sort of how I arrived.
Yeah, it does. And then in the intervening years, just kind of give us a whirlwind tour of the kind of things that you've learned since then as well. 2D,
Sure.
3D, like specific stuff. Like I know you do 2D, 3D. You do design as well. Like what parts of your skill set did you learn? And also, like, what do you still need to reach out for? Like, what kind of teammates or
oh boy,
collaborators?
So early on, I was heavy into like the After Effects Final Cut Pro pipeline. This is before Final Cut was sort of neutered. This is during that awkward phase. And so After Effects was sort of the big thing that I did, and we had to kind of shoehorn that into everything that we wanted from it. Mostly because in the Apple pipeline at the time, Apple Motion was bad. And so it just didn't do the stuff. The behaviors weren't jiving for what we wanted to create. So that's why I ended up on kind of the Adobe train, if you will. And then just more familiarity with the tool. If you can make it do everything, then you're going to be kind of entrenched with that for a while. So I want to say it's probably like 5 to 7 years of mostly just that. And there's kind of a robust world of plugins around it. So eventually After Effects is a garage rather than a tool is probably the better way to think about it. And for a long time, clients would be sending me assets, but then as I sort of expanded more into wanting more of that pie, and because the assets were generally not ready for prime time, we'll say, it behooved me to be taking more control over that, to say, I shall make these, right? Cede control of this to me, and it will be better because we're going to have less of that loss.
By asset, you mean like the design, visual?
Yeah. So here's a bunch of icons that to us, we pulled these from somewhere. These mean things about our brand. Yeah. And we're like, well, actually, how about this? You don't have any. Don't send anyone out to find or make those in-house. Let me make these for you because they will animate well, right? Because I already have the eye towards what will move well, as opposed to this very skeuomorphic type of thing. Flat design was very, very hot at the time. At the time, that was very huge as people were kind of migrating away from the skeuomorphic towards the abstract. And that not only translated into a design sort of aesthetic, but also a narrative one. How do we tell this story? Are we telling it literally, or are we telling it abstractly? Or, where on the spectrum do we fall? So that's when I sort of started doing a lot more drawing and illustrating. My drawing is still very, very weak, but that is because my mind is very geometric in the way I see and appreciate the world. I guess my mind is still very modernist in those ways. That I like brutalist architecture. Sorry, sorry guys. I like big rectangles, and that type of abstracted thing really appeals to me because many people can understand it. Right? It's very base forms, and it can be ambiguous enough that many people can find meaning in that thing. This is a parrot made out of some rounded squares and some squares, and you break it down, this is made of 4 shapes that have been put into different arrangements. Isn't that so pleasing? Right? That's kind of the idea. And that sort of defined a style. Unfortunately, I am not a very style-forward person. I don't think anyone ever hired me because of my style. They hired me to execute, and then I tried to kind of force my stuff into the arena with them. But so illustration-wise, that's where that sort of built up from, out of a desire to control, I suppose, is where that came in. And then more recently, sort of a 3D stuff over the last 5 years, like Cinema 4D has been a lot of fun. And a lot of that is just exploring and seeing. I guess it was because Cinema 4D Lite was bundled with After Effects. I was like, well, I'll give this a shot. How hard can it be? Anyway, I crack it open, like, oh, this is actually fun and good. What was I afraid of, right? And because it's the difference between a 3D and a 2D thing is 2D is a collection of shapes that roughly resemble the thing, whereas 3D just is the thing a lot of times, right? Like, well, I make the hand out of a collection of sausages attached to a rectangle. Ooh, yeah, and those are fingies, so that's how it looks. Whereas in After Effects, it's here's a bunch of shapes that kind of suggest hand, and when I move them around, if I do it wrong, you know it's definitely not right. So that's the kind of 2D, 3D divide. Now that being said, a lot of 3D, if it's not in frame or whatever, there's a lot of trickery going on. There's a lot of close-up magic.
What do you mean if it's not in frame?
So let's say, for example, I'm in frame right now, right? And if I were to just, hold on, I'm going to just go ahead and have my hands come up closer to the lens. And if I'm doing something like this, right, in a 3D context, my hands don't even need to be attached. You don't see my elbows, so that doesn't even need to be attached, right? That, like, maybe I'm just taking a hand model and jamming it in front of the frame, as opposed to thinking, oh, everything must always be connected all the time. The model must always be preserved. We must be on model, as we would say in animation. And the freedom to say, like, actually, the shot needs to be good. We don't need to be on model at all. So that's, again, a phase of getting into the technical, following rules, and then bending the rules when is applicable to us to say, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to rip the bones out of this thing because the constraints are not getting me the shot that I want. And I may do this because I understand the principles of what I'm going after at a higher level that now supersedes the lower level, if that makes sense.
Got it. So we've got the way I would break down the skill set you've mentioned so far is the kind of like the process-oriented stuff, the 2D, the design, let's bulk it all into the word design, and then some 3D. I've seen you play with audio on your channel. Are there any other parts that you would put into that skill set?
Oh, man. Other things that are good that Evan is good at.
Like a really high level of your skill set. You see it today.
So, yeah, audio, I don't know. Audio, I'm still pretty weak on. Like, I do not have an ear for things particularly well. I need those scopes. I gotta see the audio to really clean it. Narrative, I've gotten quite a bit better at, or just the idea of translating the abstract into stuff. So that kind of director forward stuff has been really fun. As I sort of consult on more things, I'm sometimes brought in as, hey, you know how to technically do this. How do we do this? And then I'll look at the breakdown of things and be like, well, actually, we can get from here to here if you just shortcut this, right? And that those types of ideas, apparently I'm very good at that, is the ability to just translate these abstract things into literalization. Or
let me dive into that, actually, because
sure.
I heard you speak about this great, you said this great phrase. I don't know whether it's your quote or someone else's, but I loved it. It was the literalization of concepts in motion design.
Yeah.
I loved it. Just like articulated the pitfalls that we always fall into when we're doing style frames or like storyboards or whatever. Mm-hmm. Especially in like, well, I work in tech, like when you're explaining like computing concepts or like, marketing concepts or like, improvement or whatever. It's like, you don't want to just be doing up and to the right with a chart or something like that. What is your, like, just talk me through like a typical project where you've got fairly abstract concepts and you are working with a client to try and avoid that literalization trap.
Yeah.
And maybe break out a little bit more what you mean by literalization. I briefly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start there. So let's say you and I have both done a fair share of tech things. So let's say we are optimizing downflow, right? Let's just say we're optimizing some downflow. That's something that maybe an engineer would say. Or if we are, we're a full stack end-to-end user experience, right? That's something someone might say. What does that even look like, right? That's the problem, is that to most people doesn't look like anything. And, is that a stack? Okay, I'll put a pile of papers on top of each other. That's a stack, right? Or it's a hamburger menu. That's a stack, right? Is it a flow chart? So when we talk about this scale between the abstracted and the literal, I tend to use the app scenario where maybe the phrase is something really common, like our users can activate our app anywhere they are. Okay, perfect. Therefore, we must show a street, a person on the street, they're holding a phone, they touch the phone, they're using the app anywhere they are. We see the words that you said, right? That's the most literal form of that. I heard user, we see one. They said anywhere, now I see them anywhere, and they're using the app. They said the three words, and I see the three pictures, right? Now, in improv, maybe we call this A to C thinking. The earlier way I would think about it was,
What does A to C stand for?
A to C is like,
I see, I get it. Yeah,
you're making, like, connect, this reminds me of this, reminds me of this. And in an abstraction concept here, we're thinking about how do we get, my first inclination, this came to me because I was like, I got to get the people out of here. We got to throw these characters out. Characters are expensive. You don't got the money for it. Throw them away, right? This is another necessity thing. How can we show this without all of that, basically? How do we break this down so it's just shapes that mean that? So in that case, if it's anywhere, anywhere could be a map. Anywhere could be a compass. Anywhere could be a picture of the earth, right? It doesn't have to be a scene on a street with cars and dogs and plants. You're freaking me out with all these cars and dogs and plants and stuff, right? Let's not do that. Let's get really simple. Hey, look, anywhere, it's a globe. We got it, right? And when we look at that, more people would say that's anywhere as opposed to that's an urban street. That's my town. That's Chicago. That's Toronto, boo, right? Like,
it's still quite literal. So I'm interested as well. Like, if you haven't, you can bring to any examples of like how abstract do you get in those moments? Because I imagine that's another thing. Well, like, so sometimes when I look at like ordinary folk, like tech videos or things like that, there's just so much like I don't even know what that is, but it sort of feels right, you know?
Yeah. So that's a very difficult line, and I think it really depends on a kind of taste, subjective taste level. We'll talk about people in a bit, but the idea of how literal something should be, I think really comes down to how specific we want it to feel. So it must be specific enough to be recognized, but it could not be so specific that it could not mean something to anybody. Those are sort of the ideas. So the more specific we get, usually the better a narrative kind of becomes, right? Let's say a company is based in Seattle, set it in Seattle, right? Well done. But then now you're based in Europe, right?
Yeah, somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, okay. Scotland, I imagine. So, but there is a regional specificity of things that can be off-putting to people, right? Like, around here, if you see someone and in the animation, eat this with any meal, the meal on the table is poutine, then oopsie doodle, you know this is French, right? And then the Anglo people will be like, well, this is not talking to me. I don't know what that is, right? So that's a sort of something that, it's too specific. We got too specific with that, right? With the thing, we need to scale it back a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm getting at between like how literal are you versus how abstracted you become. On the people side, just how do I get back to people? As soon as you show a person, you've really made a choice. Who is the person? Are you speaking to a diverse crowd? Are you speaking to no one? Right? And sometimes this comes down to a real United Colors of Benetton situation where, congratulations. Anyone can buy our sweatshop made shirts. I went through advertising courses when United Colors of Benetton was considered a fun and funny thing to joke about in class. So this is why it's very front of mind. It's like anyone can purchase these goods as long as they're beautiful. Wink, right? Like, congratulations, you have certainly one form of diversity, but you have put a lot of human bodies away from your campaign, I notice, right? A certain type of human body is allowed. Anyway, but that's the idea where we're thinking like, I know, for our thing, we must show one of every person. I did some work for a big, how specific can I get with this? Big computer company who had a very specific icon set, very abstracted people. The people are made of bricks and cubes and lines. Everything's at 90 degrees or 45 angles. when they show people, they have created caricatures of those people, which I found to be bizarre and tasteless. That when we show normies, they look like this, right, to them. And people, if you're listening in audio medium, Evan made quotes around normies. He's not a weirdo. But and they're like, when we show people from India, the man must always have a turban. Like, stop it. Stop. You operated the country. You know not everyone is wearing a turban, right? Or when we show people from Asia, we have these kimono people. Like, stop. You must stop with this, right? Like, this is a kind of insanity around you've tried to become diverse, but you've actually become racist in the process, if that makes sense, right? Your desire for specificity, right, of literally showing what we say is Japanese person has now become something grotesque, right? We have done something bad. Clever sleuths may be able to find out what brand this is. So you will recognize it immediately because the icon set has never been updated. Anyway, so that's kind of, when we're talking about that, the other thing you will notice, people say, like, make it like The Simpsons, where the people's skin tone we cannot tell. The American show The Simpsons. However, Carl is on The Simpsons, and we know what his skin color is. So let's stop playing games, right? If you really want, and this is where the corporate Memphis idea comes from. Everyone has pink and blue skin, right? We are really abstracting these things such that they could appeal to everybody. But at the same time, it starts being for nobody, if that makes sense, right? We've gone so generic that we're not saying anything about anybody at this point, right? Which, that's corporate stuff for you, right? That that's the line. We're not all creating art out here like that. But anyway, that's my spiel on the sort of literal to abstracted stuff. But the main thing is, when we're dealing with concepts, you could just show it, or you could get to it in a clever way. And the more clever and abstract it is, the more it remains shapes and icons and form, the easier it is to move from this form to that form, as opposed to we have to move from a person to a car. That's more difficult. But if it is a more icon-like person and a more icon-like car, the movement from this to this, much easier, right? Like, just in a technical thing.
The vagueness or the non-disclosure of, like, the obvious concepts also adds its own kind of, like, rhythm to the piece. Because if you're just showing, like, this is Larry has a problem, Larry doesn't have this, welcome to this tool. You get this just, like, level of just disclosure the whole time.
Yeah.
That sort of interplay of, like, oh, here's the thing, or what is the thing? Oh, here's a more depth and detail on it.
Yeah, well, let's get designy about it, right? So design is pattern and contrast, right? So line, thick line, right? This is the pattern, this is the contrast. Oh, our eyes are drawn to the contrast. That's the thing.
Is that a real song, or did you just make that up? It sounds really good.
Well, it's just a thing that's the way I try to teach it to people. But so that would be, let's say that's contrast of weight, right? We're only talking about lines. We've mixed in nothing else, right? We're only talking about the element of line, thin, thick, and then we look over here. Similarly, color, that would be way number 2. So black, blue. We look at the blue one because it stands out from the pattern of black. Oh, let's double it up. Black, thin, big, thick blue, right? And now we're really looking at that, right? Because our eye is drawn. It's 2 types of contrast. Whoa, I got to look at that. So when we get into motion, suddenly we have an extra dimension of contrasts that we can do, right? So that is fast, slow, right? So with pattern, contrast, or linear, smooth, right? So that's type of thing. Yeah, I hope my voice is really conveying these things on the people who are only listening to this.
Yeah.
So now let's go. We've got motion. Now let's get into a narrative, right? Literal, abstract, right? So these scenes are all literal. This one is abstract. These are just different ways of contrasting stuff that we can play with as we're doing the things. Because if we want to say, now we're entering a different mode, maybe all of the problems in our script are shown literally, and all the solutions to those problems are shown abstractly, and then we're going to snap back to literal at the end. We're going to bookend it because we're going from reality to the abstracted space where the stuff happens. Now we come back to reality, and the reality is a solved problem. So those areas of contrast will increase the amount of attention sort of at where they are. All of these things, as you said, if it's all literal, it's all across, right? There's no fill. So some jazz face for you there. Let's do some mouth jazz for you. But that's the important thing is what tools do you have to create contrast, interest, and attention throughout a piece? How do you make something that's 5 minutes feel like it's 3 minutes and you want to watch it, right? Like, that's hard, especially when...
Like, always fascinated me about film. Like, I never... my route into video was never direct, even though I did, like, film studies and stuff when I was younger. It was actually through film music. And what I loved about it was the kind of, like... Well, I mean, you can watch films and the film music is just, like, in your face. But generally speaking, the role of music in video is to be behind the scenes, and just one of those layers. But I particularly, because I did music, found it just intriguing, this layer that the average person is not listening to, but just utterly changes everything from the texture, the emotion, to the pace. But then, you know, if you really dissect it like we are now with design, motion, and everything, there are so many layers as well, and that's what's so interesting about that process. I have a question, just one more on the design stuff, and then I want to kind of ask you some other things, which is about in that early design phase. Well, two questions. One, it seems to me the more that I do this, that early design phase is the most critical part and is almost like the top or the bottom of the pyramid, depending on how you look at it. That if you get something wrong, or you can steer it very clearly in that beginning point, but if you kind of go down the wrong route with a slightly misconstrued concept or like goal, you end up, 30 degrees off course,
Yeah. Are people allowed to cuss on this podcast?
Fine, yeah.
All right, so the expression that...
it's not going to be spontaneous, so...
That's true, yeah.
I
just want to check before I do my cusses, if everyone's comfortable.
I said that on a Zoom call the other day, and then because it was with a colleague, and then I was like, that's really lame to just introduce that you're about to swear, and then swear.
And now watch as I don't do it. See, that's a head fake. So... Yeah, they would say like poopy in, poopy out. See? It's a little contrast for us. So the expectation, I'm about to cuss, and then I don't do it. So they would always say, if it's crap in, it's going to be crap coming out, right? That's the mantra of most production. We cannot make a good table if we have rotten wood. We're not going to make good film if we have bad footage. We certainly can't make a good film if we have a bad script. If the ingredients are rotten, the bread is bad, right? That's the whole thing.
And so when you come into these, sorry to interrupt, when you come into these, you mentioned a while ago that you get brought in sometimes like mid-flight or like early flight. Is it really just a case of like you're questioning the requirements? You're like, you think we're here, but we're actually needing to go back here. Like even before the script, let alone design, you're like, why are we making the video? Like, do you...
Now, in my early days... because I could not be choosy of the clients that I got, right? Of course, in these days, I cannot be as choosy with the clients I get. But at least I'm in a better space to help direct and coach people now that I have far more social skills to make this work. My 3 years in sales was not wasted. So the idea that, you've brought me a bad thing, what's the best thing I can do with this, I think is still... a worthwhile exercise, especially because you're going to be working muscles to lift. It's a bigger lift to do that. How do I rescue this thing? You've come to me with an absolutely brutal script that is verbose. It's 7 lists of 3 things, each run-on sentence more confounding than the next. How do these even become anything, right? You're in it, right? You're in the danger zone with this. And if you can pull that back, then as soon as we take away that friction, you're going to really be cruising. But it's worth it to train this running uphill muscle, right? At the time I was doing it, I bemoaned all of these bad scripts that would come to me. Bad to me. To someone, they were precious babies, and those precious babies needed to be nurtured into beautiful videos. But they were somebody's baby. An engineer wrote this. The person closest to the subject matter wrote this, who are themselves not particularly strong communicators as much as they are subject matter experts, and did not go through a sort of pass of refinement before it arrives at this phase. You got to work with it, alchemy-like, to turn this lead balloon into a golden rainbow, right? Like, let's do that. And so much of my early career are based around that I found a lot of things like, this would be easier if it was like this. This would be better if they made these choices. And so now I'm able to really say, hey, really succinctly and quickly, these are the areas that we can simply remove. We can refine this, blah, blah, blah. What do you think before I get started? I'm going to save you about $5,000 if you do this instead of what you brought to me. And that is a very compelling argument to people when they are weighing, does it need to be my precious thing, or could it be a cheaper version of this thing, right? And in reality, what I'm doing is I'm pruning out the amount of time it would take to smash this thing into a form that will be acceptable, not just to me, but to them. Because I think a lot of people do not understand what the future will look like based on where they're standing now. And with, I'm about to go on a trip. What have you brought with me? Well, I brought hiking shoes because we're about to walk up a mountain. What did you bring? Oh, I brought Scrabble. Okay, cool. So you're going to have a rough trip with that Scrabble, but I'm going to have a good trip with my hiking shoes because I came in prepared. So I'm going to carry you the rest of the way, I guess. Those types of things are easier to communicate when you can sort of bring them into terms that the other person will understand. That if we make these changes, the benefit they want is a thing that is done faster or less expensively. Well, I can communicate in those ways. Absolutely. That is the net result of the thing. And then when this is done, I'll move on to another project. There'll be way less friction. We'll all be happier with the result. Especially if, there's a lot of things that are kind of up in the air that you're filling in. I'm going to be able to fill in a much nicer picture that you're going to enjoy if we start from this better phase. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. In a lot of ways, it is immutable. Sometimes the script that comes to you is immutable, and you must do what you can because that's gone from the scientist to the PR person to their boss to their boss. It's been approved by 10 levels of people, and now it's here. And if we had to make a change to it, we got to get people back on board of this whole thing. It's not happening. This is the thing. We must go forward with the map we have. And at that point, then you put on your problem-solving hat, which I'm going to imagine is like a less problematic pith helmet, and we get to it, right? That we start shaping this into something that makes a form of sense, and we start pitching ideas, get there incrementally, because we know there's something really specific in here, right? They use 20 words to describe this. There's something specific in there that they want, right? Just talk to somebody about it and you'll arrive there together, right? Don't silo yourself from it. Get whoever wrote this in the room or the virtual room. Be like, so here's 3 ideas that could go here. This is the most literal one. Here's an abstracted one. Here's an incredibly abstracted one. Do you like one of those? I like this one. Boom. Okay, we're going to go down the road with this. And I just made a terrible napkin sketch. So anyway,
so the whole process,
part 1 of
one question before we move to the tools is about the iterative nature of all of your work. Do you ever get to a project where you're like, you see the whole landscape and you're like, right, we just need to like execute on this? I imagine no. I imagine it's all the opposite of that. But I'm interested.
So that that loop shortens with experience, right? That
I'm not talking about whether your client is on board with your vision, about you like standing at the beginning. And I'm not talking like, oh, I've done one of these explainer videos before and I've done it on a similar product. I'm talking about just like generally like a new exciting thing. Does it come to you quickly and then it's about like finding the detail? Or is it like, I have no idea, I'm just going to put one step in front of the other?
Yeah, I mean, some things really spark, right? That you see something and it automatically conjures images, or at least to me in my mind. I see this thing, something's already happening. In most cases, no. In most cases, I have to work a process to get there. The process is faster, and it may, to an outside observer, if they saw me doing the work of the thing, it's like, what's Evan doing? He's just making a bunch of circles on the paper. Is that something? And then at the end of it, this is something to me now, right? And I've gotten to there. And most often, it is a process of simply rejecting ideas that I don't like, that have come to me, and I find them wanting, and I discard them. So a lot of people who I work with, like, Evan, you have so many good ideas. Like, no, I actually just have a higher volume of ideas. Most of them are bad, and I don't share them with you. Right? That's the thing, is that I'm rejecting a lot more things because we're just able to process them. With experience, you are simply able to have more of those angles on a thing. This is a bit of a callback to the beginning, talking about how teaching helps the craft. If you can see something from many, many angles, you're now able to formulate more solutions in more different ways of seeing this problem. You essentially become, as terrifying as it may seem, able to sort of embody sort of different ways of thinking, which I think is something psychologists might consider dangerous sometimes.
No, like the creative process is like well known, isn't it? Like different hats, like being the producer, being the drafter, the executor.
Yeah, but not just that. So in this sense, all right, let's imagine that we're doing marketing of some kind, right? We'll just imagine it. And there is an exercise that people tend to call, the persona type study, where we imagine the different people who will be interacting with this thing. Who are they? What are their desires? What do they want? How do they see this thing? Go around. Let's get 8 of those things going, right? And if we're approaching that from the sense of opinion of a thing, but we don't have to. We could say, How would someone who is much more sort of literal-minded approach this? How would they see this? How would someone who only knows how to use 3D software approach this? How would someone who only does traditional animation approach this, right? So you can think about it through all these different lenses of people. And the other thing that's helpful about that, if you're further along, if you are a producer of some kind and you apply this idea, you will very easily be able to say, this is the winner. This one here that is a primarily 3-dimensional simulationist thing, we need to get a Houdini person on this, right? We know this because that is a gap we don't have, but that concept is a banger. So get someone in here. And those gaps, you can only identify them if you think in those ways, and that you free your mind to see these different possibilities, but you must have the possibilities to draw upon, right? So when we think about free your mind and the rest will follow, go back to that, is that the Rick Rubin book, I think, that people love looking at, that says, relax and let your taste sort of take over the stuff. The idea that you must relax really is stop holding on to the one tool that you have. If I only looked at the world through the lens of After Effects, I would only be producing a certain form of work from that. And that's if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail type of deal, right? But even within After Effects as a tool, it's got a lot of stuff. But methodologically, if you grip only to your one way of viewing and solving problems, you are going to spend so much more time trying to make your way fit the thing as opposed to finding the best way for the thing, right? Which is really thematically, when I tried to apply Army multimedia logic to sketchy tech business explainer video, it didn't fit because I don't have an infrastructure of stuff around me. The rigidity is not useful and people cannot be ordered around, right? All of those factors were not there. So the process didn't make any sense. So I had to abandon that way of thinking and then find new ways that are more in line with where I am. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Great. Nice. I love it. I'm going to grab a segue here, a very loose segue, which is you mentioned After Effects, and I do want to talk about that and tools.
Yeah.
Now. I'm going to swear. People shit on After Effects a lot in the motion world, in the design world, and I totally get why people shit on Adobe a lot as well. However, I have not found a tool as flexible and like all-encompassing as that, and it still sticks around as the default or de facto tool for doing a lot of post stuff. And I'd love to hear your perspective as obviously like that's your primary tool, and you know the industry really well, like other tools that are out. Why has it stuck around? And you touched on it in a really good point here, which is like After Effects is not a tool, it's a garage. Yeah, I'd love you to talk about that and whether that's even true or that's just my perception.
So one of the things is market dominance. There are very few compositors at its scale and market penetration. This is how it is, right? That's
sure.
Apple Motion was a contender.
But you know about other tools, so I look at it like from that angle. Like you stay with After Effects, and why is that?
Yeah, so I stick with it. One, it's incredibly comfortable for me, and that I'm able to make it do stuff, and I'm a pretty safe person. Let's say that. I'm a really safe person. I grew up, this is a bit of a tangent. I know we're tight on time. Hopefully we can hang out for a bit while I go nuts on this.
Whatever you can do is great with me.
Beautiful. So I come from a kind of trades family. So my dad was a carpenter, my grandpa was a mason, and a golfer. Big golfers, big carpenters in the family. It is a poor tradesman that blames their tools. It is a poor golfer who buys clubs every season. These are the mantras that were told to me as a child every season, all the time. Oh, why can't I get it to carve? Like, well, probably you're bad at carving, son. Maybe you should stop blaming that tool. Like, it's your manipulation of the tool. And this is freeing for many reasons, because it means the tool is in your hands, and it is you that controls it. You don't like After Effects? Pick up another tool, right? You don't need to be emotive about it, right? Like, it's a tool. It is what it is. It's an expensive tool. There's not a lot of other tools around. And if you cannot find a more appropriate tool, it behooves you to master that tool and do something with it. But you must master it, right? You must master it. And that is really critical. A table saw is a blade mounted to a plate, right? That's all it does. You can adjust its angle. You may go faster, slower, higher, lower. That's it. But you can make an entire kitchen with one whirling blade attached to a plate of steel. That's it. So from these base principles, we can understand that while the tool may have its shortcomings in terms of speed, some people have a lot of stability problems. Some people encounter a lot of like errors. I'll say this, some people are also grafting a lot of other stuff into it. Right, they are pushing it in ways that are kind of outside of the box. I don't like to blame user error, right? Because now I'm blaming people for things. But I and a lot of other people play it pretty vanilla with this thing. We leave it stripped down until the time arises to deploy unique things within it. And
you're talking about plugins, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, man, this thing crashes all the time. Oh yeah, are you loading up a lot of plugins whenever you crack it open? Well, there's conflicts there because those are a bunch of third-party tools that don't even know each other. Now, the other thing, why does After Effects not get totally overhauled? Because as a legacy thing, it must respect all of the people who still own many, many versions of the thing. It cannot totally create a new thing. That would be creating an entirely new product of some form. And if anyone is sort of familiar with the ecosystem of software, you are limited by sort of the size of the team and the budget allocated to it. And so there are hard stops on what can be done in a calendar year that are not necessarily totally driven by the forces that you or I may understand of them. So as for why I stick with After Effects a lot, is because After Effects is a compositor and it is the locus for many things coming into it, right? It is the place at which many things meet. And so that means that even if I do 3D work, I will ultimately probably need to composite it somewhere. If I'm doing cell work, I'm probably going to need to put it together somewhere else. The tools that are unique to and fabulous within After Effects, your text animators and stuff like that, hard to beat the way those work. A lot of people don't like them because they are abstracted and kind of weird. But once it clicks, the world opens for you.
So the way I kind of think about it as well, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Is like, so I work in tech in a no-code company called Glide, and the whole idea of like no code, which isn't a name that we like particularly, is that like it's an abstracted higher layer of making software. Yeah. But it's on Rails, and so you can't do everything that you can if you're a very experienced developer. And After Effects has this, like I've tried a lot of other motion tools, like 2D specifically, and there are loads coming out, and I'd be interested in your opinion in some of them. After Effects, it's a loose analogy or comparison, but it feels a little bit more like code, in the sense that like when you get into the guts of code, if you're like not experienced, you go, this is messy. I've got to like deal with Git. Like where are all these files? And After Effects, like for me at least, for the first year and a half, kind of felt like that. I was like, when am I going to find flow with this? When is this going to move to the unconscious, and I'm going to actually start and be able to be on the forefront of my creation rather than thinking of the how to get there structure of it. So I don't know whether that resonates in any way with you.
It does. And specifically when you say like a no code versus a code type of thing, Apple Motion, which I have dunked on earlier in this, that was a no-code situation, right? Here's a layer, here's a behavior. Okay, you got it, right? Well, I want it to do something slightly different. Nope.
Yeah.
I'd love to help you out, but nope. So same type of idea, right?
It's but like a real balance, because I'd be interested. Have you tried any of the the new ones? Like Cavalry, I'm getting Ian on actually at some point. Like, I think is a really good blend of this. Like
it is
this axis that we're talking about here.
So Cavalry, I found it to be very much more like a synthesizer, that it behaves much more in that way, that here's a bass, here's a modifier. Let's put these like here's a wave, here's a delay, stuff like that, right? So we're more remixing of stuff in a very non-destructive way. So it's very interesting. It is a very different way of thinking about stuff, and I think in the time I was doing stuff with it, I found myself thinking, this makes interesting components that I could then use, because my work was mostly narrative based, right? There wasn't a lot of character rigging or characterful stuff available there. But if I was making sick GIFs for, we're going to put a sneaker in here, we're going to put some sick text in here, it's going to like wow, 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 love it, right? This is doing it, because it's very play oriented. It's rock the rails. Something's going to come out of this, and that synthesizer like vibe that I'm gonna plug this into this, and then I'm gonna turn this dial, and hey, look at what it's doing. Whoa, right? I found it a little bit unintuitive, but it was early days, so maybe things have changed about the way you interface with it. So that's sort of my stance on that. That it seemed not quite ready for prime time at that time, and it probably wasn't because it was very, very early, right? Then we get into something like Rive, right? I don't know if you've touched this bad boy. When people think about Rive, they think, "Oh, this is such a challenge to After Effects." So Rive is a challenge. Rive is a challenge to the GIF, right? This is bigger than that. This is bigger than that, right? You can make Tetris in Rive. You can make interactive things. You can make games. You're at a different level entirely with this. If you're making stuff for a mall and you're not using Rive, what are you doing? Because this is the kind of interaction, hold states, systems within systems type of deal. Very essential to be able to do stuff with that, because it changes with, it is a user input type of thing. So I'm going to do something, it's going to do something back. You can change between states. That's, to me, all the animation tools are whatever, right? Because it's got the stuff, right? It's got the stuff. You can do stuff with it. that's what sings about Rive is, whoa, we can make it dance, as the person wants. So it's a level of difference. The biggest complaint, I think, and one of the interesting questions I get is, I've made this thing in After Effects. How can I make it interactive? I'm like, the output is only video. The output is video. That's what comes out of this bad boy, right? So that is a huge difference in those areas. Now, on the other side of things, a lot of people are on a 3D sense. So Cinema 4D is sort of my first intro to 3D was Rhino. Shout out to all my Rhino fans out there. And Bryce, yeah, there we go. Any Bryce heads in the chat? And after that was Maya, which was a mistake because that terrified me away from 3D for a very long time. And then coming back at Cinema 4D, which was had a way of thinking that was, again, non-destructive, make some primitives, put some modifiers on them. Nothing's breaking yet until you switch it over into polygon mode, and then you're into danger country. But that type of thing, and people go head-to-head with Blender, right? It's hard to beat Blender on price. It's free. But Blender is the most code, I would say, of these solutions, right? If we're thinking of a no-code versus code analogy, Blender is like, hey, you gotta make the tool, right? Hey, not only is this a garage, but all of the tools are currently iron. Clink. So go make a chisel, buddy.
Yeah, Blender seems like shitting on After Effects and saying Blender is is the only thing seem to be like the popular things to say, and it's almost like uncool to use Cinema, right? Like someone asked me the other day, who I really respect, about like essentially they were like, why do you use Cinema? It's like, it's really, I can't explain it yet compared to someone who's not into 3D. But yeah, you put it really well there. Have you played with Spline? Not Spline.
Yeah.
Well, that's
yes.
one. I'm
so
thinking
Spline,
of Plasticity.
Womp. Oh, yeah. There's a bunch of them, right? There's a lot of these things. And Adobe themselves are jumping on this. Like, hey, let's make our own.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
I haven't tried that yet. What's it called?
Yeah. They are, and I think they're very, right now, most of these exist in sort of the toy space, I would say. We're at toy, we're not yet at tool. And so we can make cool stuff. A lot of the things in like Spline and these sort of in-app 3D things, they all kind of come out a little bit samey, unfortunately, right? Because they kind of have a little bit of a sameness. You can produce a certain type of style with them, and it looks nice. It's cute. If you can pump out an OBJ or a GLB file, heck yeah, right? You're already most of the way there, because that's what we want to come out of the thing. So big thumbs up to everyone who's making those happen. And because they are lighter, right, and they are more on the toy side, you're going to play with them more. You're going to have fun results. You're going to get the dopamine feedback loop. Kabam! Now you're into 3D. Whoa, it's a gateway drug. And the tool will evolve as people use more of it. So play with it. Play with them now. Get into it. It costs you nothing to do this while you drink coffee in the morning, right? Yeah.
But you're using Cinema primarily if you're doing.
I do, yeah.
And do you work with people who are like super experienced 3D rendering artists, or would you say that you're in that camp now? Like I don't know. I just have.
No, I'm purposefully in 3D. I make things that are abstracted because making them photoreal is hard.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, give me that toon shader because I can hide a lot of my crimes in here, right? I wanted to go back to the popular opinion to say this is everything, this is bad, right? That sort of tool thing. One, it's weird to have these kinds of strong reactions to tools. And I mean that because if you don't like it, you can stop using it and you can learn something else, right? And the other thing is that you're putting so much energy into something that maybe it's not even going to change, and it's not helping you do anything, right? Like, it's not helping you to make these sorts of broad, sweeping thoughts and stories about an object that's just here to do what you tell it to do. I just think about going back to that, like, a poor carpenter blames their tools type of thing. If I spent all day swearing at a chisel, all that energy is not going into the wood, right? That's what's not going on, right? Put the energy into the wood. Like, man, this chisel sucks. You can sharpen your chisel. And then it's like, oh, now it's cutting great. Yeah, if you spent more time sharpening the chisel and less time cussing at it, which sharpens nothing, you'd be in a better sort of zone. Now, that being said, all things change all the time, right? Will this be the dominant paradigm all the time? No, probably not. In fact, many things have risen and fallen in my time sort of being here, right? I came in when Betamaxes were still being used. Those don't exist anymore. They were destroyed. Physical media will not exist, apparently. Apparently the Blu-ray factory, Sony's shutting that bad boy down. So no more Blu-rays. So like these sorts of, I want to say like attachments to discourse are unproductive.
Someone put it as well. They said something that I've just felt intuitively, even though I'm not very experienced with Blender. And someone may contend this, but like they said that cinema feels like you can get to the same output in many different ways, whereas in Blender it feels like there's like one or two ways to do the thing. And I think After Effects feels like that as well. It's like you've got this whole like repository in cinema of like all these different tools, like I'll just call them computations, right? Like these different things you can bring in and chain together and put together, a bit like the way that we think about stuff at Glide with no code. And then you can create the thing that you want, the functionality, in multiple different ways.
I think in Blender you can as well, but the paths are less trodden, if that makes sense. Or so in the cinema thing, right? I've got a ball. I want it to be a wacky, spiky ball. Okay, let's put a deformer on it. Whoa, it's a wacky, spiky ball now. In Redshift, I'm going to use something in the shader that will make it a wacky, spiky ball. Whoa, we got two. I'm going to simply grab the points and I'm going to push them on their normals. 3 wacky, spiky balls, right? They all come with their various setbacks and positives for why we might do one methodology or the other. But you've got a lot of paths, and the paths are very available. They're signposted paths that we can get to. After Effects is the same way, right? I have a rectangle. I want it to behave like a flag. Can I interest you in the many, many effects that have been built up over a lifetime, a generation of people needing to solve that problem? We got wave warp. We've got, Bezier things. Like we have this spectrum of stuff. I will often explain it like Pokemon to people. Because I like Pokemon. And if you say this effect sort of evolves into this one, evolves into this one, evolves into this one. They are connected in a family. Fill, it would evolve into ramp, would evolve into, would sort of evolve into the 4-color ramp, right? That's your Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard way of thinking about this. Those are fire-type Pokemon that evolve into each other with enough experience for the non-Pokemon people out there. And the other things like tint is 2 colors, tritone 3, CC toner up to 5, colorama infinite, right? And all of them, if you only need to do 2, we got that. If you want to do 3, if you want to do 2, 3, 5, right? So you've got play in these avenues to get you close, further, further, further. A lot of them come with more computational power required. Oh man, my machine is slow. Like, well, you're using this thing to do what a lighter thing would accomplish better. My favorite one of those are the blurs, when people are blurring stuff up. Say, I'm using camera blur because camera blur looks the nicest. True, but it certainly needs a lot of your machine to get there. Is anyone noticing? Are you using all of the things that it does? Or could you just use a Gauss in the house Gaussian blur to make that
and that is
do the same?
Is like the hardest part, I would say, of the learners, like the early learner's journey in motion, like particularly with rendering. Like the last year or so, I've been trying to get that photorealistic thing, and I haven't done the easy thing. Like I've been like, no, I'm only gonna do the photorealistic stuff. I'm not interested in stuff before that. Which you can. It's not the greatest.
How many samples? How many samples per thing?
In render settings, and you're just like, I'm not making anything here. Like I'm just working with the limitations of this machine and the settings that I half know. And you're like,
Yeah.
is there a better way? So on that note, like I'm interested, like have you encountered in your learning journey in the past those places where you've just gone down a rabbit hole, and have you like kept going? Like have you ever experienced those kind of blocks where you're like, I'm reaching so far out of my skill set?
Yeah, I think pretty much any time that I am dipping into kind of renderer stuff, that kind of flips my bean sometimes. Redshift I do find difficult because it deals with a lot of small numbers, which is hard for me to conceive of. If they simply multiplied everything by 100, I'm sure it would make sense to me, right? Like that's the what's the difference between 0 and 1? A lot. There's a lot in there between 0 and 1. But it's 0 and 1. Yeah, well 0 is off and 1 is on. So it's the world between those areas.
Yeah.
But also to understand a lot of those, some are linear, some are logarithmic. So, what is 0.5? Is that halfway between? No, it's not halfway between. You're nuts. You only ever want a value of 0.234.
Are we getting an inside look to your creative process at home on your own? This is Evan's shoulder.
Yeah. There are constantly demons in my head screaming at me about these things. No, usually it's a fairly placid experience. It's me staring thoughtfully at something, and then something might happen. And sometimes it's a lot of activity and me being very rude to people who interrupt my mind, which is stuff I'm diligently trying to work on. I've been alone for so long. Over the pandemic, my wife has been forced to work next to me in an office here. We have more bedrooms than there are people, so we got the space for many offices in the house. But it's an adjustment to be like, this is what it looks like when you work. Yeah, unfortunately. But in terms of that kind of learning sort of process, like I feel I have to do it. If I don't do it, I'm not going to learn it. And by that I mean I can't just read about it. I have to come up with this phrase like you got to rock the rails to see what it does. Which is that a camera term? I don't even know where this filtered into my lexicon. That like, what does this slider do? I don't know. Push it up and down and see what happens. Okay, all right. So now I know here is where the slider might want to go. But I've seen the extremes of the slider, so now I know where the slider would rest if I wanted to do one of those things. So critical for the way I learn, I can't just read about it. That's not anything for me. Like, and I can't just watch it. I can't watch someone do it because that's not me doing it. It has to live in my body. And I was trying to advise someone. They were having a hard time learning stuff. They're saying, I've read about this over and over again. It's not sinking in for me. Why is this concept not working for me? I'm like, well, how often are you doing it? Was the one thing I was saying. Well, I've just been reading about it. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so when you're trying to learn something, there are many styles of learning that could happen. And again, this is something that comes from teaching, because as you teach more people, you will encounter more people's learning styles. You're going to see that your thing, when you apply it to this person, doesn't get in as much as if you with these other people. So you get to test and you get to see this happening. What I have found is that if you have multiple engagements in your mind of this thing, it will stick better. So let's say that the concept is something like speed ramping of keyframes, right? Pretty like we're going to bend the curve and then it's going to be faster at this point and then it's going to taper off at that point. So that type of a thing, when you just read about it, that doesn't mean anything, right? Influence handles what? I'm not seeing it. Okay, well let's read about it. Let's see it. Let's read about it. Let's see it. Let's do it. That's not enough. Let's tell ourselves a story about what's happening. What's a story we can tell ourselves about how these two keyframes and their handles are impacting this? Make them characters in your mind. This keyframe is telling the property, it's yelling at it, it's giving commands like this, and this one's giving commands, and this line represents how loud it's yelling. And the louder it yells, the more that this story works for some people, right? Or you want to turn it into a metaphor. You want to graft it on to concepts that you understand already. You're trying to create as many inroads to make this stick for you.
And do you do this with yourself as well as your students as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you do this more and more, just as a personal exercise, you will eventually find this one method absolutely knocks the others out of the park, and then you simply do that. So for me, it is this kind of narrative thing. So one of the hardest skills that I was been learning was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Very difficult, very steep curve on that one. So if you think about the learning curve of something, it's literally like experience level to aptitude, and it's ow, 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 ow. And then you start to go up a little bit. But there's a lot of ouch on the way. After Effects is the same way, like, because there's a lot of obtuse stuff. Ouch, 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 ouch. Oh, something's happening. So, but what helped me kind of get techniques down was to, just like when I'm learning to tie my shoes, loop, swoop, and pull, get those bunny ears, right? It's the same thing. And making it something funny was helping. Making something stupid and funny as I'm trying to learn these things. And that helps to internalize the idea, as opposed to like, you grab the collar, you're pulling this way, get the arm off balance. Like, okay, let's stop that. Let's just focus on cues that make sense. We see this in a lot of coaching, where the coach must create a sequence of cues to get the athlete to do what they want. And so for some people, if you're, I did some personal training for a bit too, back when I was in university. And this is a thing where it's like, some people really respond to being told, imagine you're trying to slurp spaghetti with your butt cheeks when you do a squat, right? That is something that helps people get good form and glute activation as they're doing a squat, right? Some people, that doesn't land for them. Some people say, imagine you're pinching a dime between your butt, right? Don't drop the dime, right? Some people will actually put a dime in their pants, right? That's something people will do. But these are cues, and if you find the cue that works with the athlete, you're going to have much more success, because in the middle of coaching, you can just shorthand, bam, hit them with this, and then they're going to do it right away. In Taekwondo, that's huge because their cognitive space is very narrow, and you have to be able to yell at them the thing that they need in that moment, and it has to respond because they're not seeing what you're seeing. They got to get this. Now, the other thing, you are your athlete that you're coaching when you're learning. You must apply the same rigor that you would to an external force or an external thing that you would to yourself. You must have the metacognition to step beyond your body, get out of your own mind. What is happening with me? What am I responding to? This is what the kind of meta-awareness of the self is about, right? When I look at Twitter first thing in the morning, I have a bad day. Well, let's step outside of yourself and stop doing that, right? Like, these are bigger life problems. But when it comes to learning and tools specifically, these are aspects that are causing me stress. Hold on. Boo! You've identified the problem. These aspects of your work are causing you stress. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that we need to explore those areas so you understand their mechanisms better? Does it mean you need to avoid those areas because they are unproductive for you? Is there something that we can explore here to say we go deeper or we avoid, right? Those are useful things to think about. And because everything is changing all the time, right, it behooves you to learn how to learn, because that's going to be pretty useful. We are the only species on Earth that can remake ourselves in our own image. So it behooves us to do so.
I'm going to grab that segue just to lead us into the last few questions about the industry and the AI thing as well.
Sure.
How do you, I'm interested in your take on where motion is going. I guess you could phrase this in a couple of questions. You could phrase it like, what are the tools that are missing today? What are the ways that you see the major tools and the major players evolving? Can you see any way that this is going to be disrupted? And also, I'm throwing you too many here. Like, what kind of videos are being made and are going to want to be made in future? Like, what is video going to do?
Sure.
Like, what are we as humans wanting to do with video?
What are we even doing, man? I have no idea. In terms of tool gaps, I think a lot of for a while, the buzzword was like joy, or it was, we're trying to sort of close the distance between thought and action or intention and result. I think that's still the idea, is that we're going to see more things driving towards reducing the intention to result. The unfortunate thing is I'm seeing a lot of noise in between. So generative AI being probably the most glaring of it, my intention is to see a dog floating in space, right? Intention, result, there's nothing in the middle. You could describe it as best you can. A lot of that actually doesn't matter. We're not going to get too deep into that anyway. But the point is, we're shortcutting from intention to result, and I think we are missing a lot of what belongs in the middle, which is actually being able to get what you want, not just accept what a system has given you, because the thing it has given you is certainly better than the nothing you had before. So that kind of cognitive bias, which is short-circuiting exploration and iteration, and it's creating, let's say, quick feedback loops that are perhaps detrimental to the actual process of learning and problem solving, that will spill over into frustration as more friction is encountered in reality. So in those ways, I think we're still moving generally in that direction. In terms of a video-focused thing, the sort of things that I kind of see coming up down the pipeline are the idea of, well, let's try to use our generativeness, and AI is deployed in a lot of ways, right? So, but it's, if we think about AI in the same way we think about internal combustion engine, right, or in terms of nuclear power, it makes powerful energy. It also destroys human lives. So there's technology is, right, and it's the deployment of it that makes it moral or immoral. So that's important. And the other thing, though, is if these things are kind of shortcutting, or we're not getting the things that we can actually fine-tune and make it something of intention, it's not really a tool, right? It's not really a tool. If I can't deploy my intention through it to create something that I specifically want on the other side. Now, in terms of video tools, we're seeing a lot of like disruption to the stock space. I think that's probably the most hit, because obviously, why would I comb through a bunch of stock video when I can imagine the thing that I want? But I'll say this, why is the AI not being deployed to simply help me search through the existing libraries of stuff that is, right? If a machine can learn what all of the things it sees and ingests is, how is that not being deployed to simply tag the thousands and millions of images that exist so that I can find them in a way? That's my big frustration with stock marks, is they're just not labeled good. They're labeled very poorly. And if a language model can understand the way a human thinks and sees, help me search the thing, right? Help me, robot, do what I demand. But in terms of sort of labor disruption, there is the perception of labor value, right? Which is, of course, under threat because of automation, as is true of all automations always. I don't want to belabor too many sort of points around that if the perception of labor value declines, then, of course, the actual ability to earn a living at the thing kind of declines, and I can name on one hand how many potters I know. So these are just things to consider when we think about what does the future look like if things sort of trend in this direction. The other thing, though, is the other day I read that we're about to see an incredible bubble explode around this thing because investment in the technologies has not netted profits, and therefore the money is about to evaporate, which a lot of these things are overpromising, overhyping, and not delivering at all, right? Here's an AI tool that actually is good. It's called RotoBrush, and it's been around for a pretty long time, and it rocks, right? Like,
yeah, and yet that's also like one small tool within a pipeline, right? It's not the platform, so to speak. And we're like thinking of this a ton at Glide, because like Glide is a platform for creating software, and it's already incredibly robust in that regard. So we're thinking about how to like bring it practically in. I'm not going to talk about Glide. I'm just what you said there about like intention to result and it's still giving you the controls and finesse in between is the dream that we're all aiming for, or a lot of people are aiming for. So I guess another way of asking this question is like, have you thought about the way that motion tools could do that in future? Like, have you dreamed
Yeah.
of that a little bit? And like, and I'm talking like 15 years in future, sort of like.
Well, once the cranial stents are installed, we're going to be doing a lot better. But so one thing about that I'm not sure if a lot of people are considering is that the friction actually produces the insights that get us to the refinement of our ideas. So I told the whole story of my stuff on here, right? And if I hadn't had the friction, I'll just swap my microphone around. If I hadn't had the friction of the early struggles, I would not have the insights that I can now apply to create good work. And the various ways of seeing and thinking that now that shape how I make stuff. And not only how I make stuff, but what I even make has been informed by all of the experience that came before. If we are cutting out all of the friction in between, we are gaining no insight, and we are imagining fewer and fewer things because our breadth of experience is limited. We're not having it. We're not having an experience, right? That is, we are getting the experience of seeing a result, but because we didn't have to work to make it, we didn't have to have many, many ideas and reject them, right? Our first idea came out perfectly. We're done. Get me out of here, right? No other ideas. My first idea is the best one, and there it is. So that's one sort of danger of that type of generative technology. I have always wanted to see a plurality technology that says, you're thinking this way, here's a bunch of other ways you could be thinking about this. Bwam! Let's stop going in, let's go out. I'm not seeing a lot of that. I'm not seeing a lot of suggestion engine stuff, right? That we see it a lot in product suggestion. You liked watching Gladiator, you're going to love these, right? It's always wrong, but it does suggest. And that's because it has no experience really with my taste and the idea that I don't want an aggregate of the average of what I've seen. I want something novel and surprising that will delight in the way that this will send me to.
Have you ever played with Text FX from Google Labs?
I feel like I have.
Like that was just like truly joyous. Like when I saw that, I was like, this is what we want AI to be bringing to us. Like this is the sort of like the slant on it. But no, I'm going to steer you a little bit on this question. You're probably going here anyway, but like what parts of the motion entire production pipeline would you be very happy to hand over? Like I totally get that we're in agreement about the resistance stuff, but like there are many parts of the motion pipeline that like I will say goodbye to the resistance that I experience in certain areas. Like for example, render settings, right? Like
yes.
Like if you're not a true in the weeds photographer and you're actually just trying to get photos for a utility or for another purpose so you can get back to doing this big thing over here where your creativity is, you don't want to be dealing with aperture and stuff like that. You love that auto setting, right? Similarly for me with render settings, like I'm not like such a 3D artist that I really want to like dive in and make that my craft. So I guess for you, what parts would be replaced? And
I think that's a very good point. That because a lot of those, now when I think about render settings, a lot of my stuff is about deliverability. Where's it going? We make the render settings to that, right? And that does not require a lot of thought process, right? It takes transmitting a brief to the specs, and then the specs go into this thing, and then that's what we come out with, right? I don't have to make a lot of decisions. I simply need to input the numbers. Anytime when that is the case, please make it go away, right? Because there is nothing, that is just me moving my hands around, right? Let's stop doing that. That's something that could certainly be better automated, right? It's the same thing with like, let's close up the kitchen triangle so I stop walking 100 feet to make an omelet, right? It's that same type of idea. Similarly, if a machine can watch what you're doing, wouldn't it be lovely if they could find ways to optimize and suggest optimizations to you? For example, you're always taking 3 clicks to do something that you could do in 1. Hey, buddy, how about would you like to make a button? Hey, buddy, you want a button that does those 3 clicks in 1 click, right? Like, that's what an assistant does for you, right? An assistant turns your 5 tasks into 1 task. It's not, I anticipated your needs and here's this. It's, your needs. Here's a way you can get there faster. So the idea of let's bundle this stuff and kabam, you've done this 10 times. So here's if you're doing 3 clicks instead of 1 click, it doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of people out there, I know, but this is just an analogy because these are processes that must be sort of done. But if you can condense them based on the personalized thing that you're doing, that is an experience you've already had. This is the workflow you want. Now, please collapse that on itself. So in sort of a coding or a presetting type of thing, we would just save a preset, right? That's the same thing that we would do. I use these 20 effects to produce this. I save it as a preset. Now I call on that again and again. Do that for actions, right? Allow us to produce scripts that can perform our actions. The actions panel in Photoshop is a beautiful example. It's been there for so long, right? Same thing. I must repeat these many, many steps. Let me record them. Let me do them again, right? At the one button. So that type of idea of automating what the user wants to be automated, I think that's the part that is missing in a lot of these. It's a lot of like, let me just anticipate what you want. I know what you want because I'm a paternalist company and I will tell you what you desire. Like we've seen from an aggregate study that most people behave this way. Like it doesn't matter. I don't have the tool with all the knobs on it so that you can rip all my knobs off, right? Like that's, that's the idea. That like, if we look back at the backlash, I hinted to it before that I was new in the industry at the time when Final Cut became Final Cut X, right? And they ripped all the knobs out, and that it got dropped. It's not a tool anymore; it's a toy. Go away, right? And everyone abandoned it. So. Or they just simply didn't upgrade, right? It was an unwanted simplification of a thing. And the lesson there is professional people need the dials. We need the things because that is how we translate our intention into action, is through the refinement and being able to say, this is not to my taste. I must be able to tweak it until it becomes my taste. And if the idea is just relax and the rest will follow. Well, if I'm relaxing so much that the machine is doing all of the choices anymore, I'm making myself inessential to what is happening. And I'm gonna tell you, man, that's super depressing. That's gonna lead to a whole lot of antidepressants getting eaten because the feeling of inessentialness is horrible. It's a horrible feeling, and to feel important in your own work is vital to do the work. That's... Anyway, this may be more philosophical than we really need to get, but yeah.
No, it's not. It's good because I wanted to ask you my last question just because I need to... no, but I mean, by hopefully, I mean, like maybe there'll be some tangents and that's cool.
Okay.
Not hopefully because I'm not enjoying the conversation. I'm interested in what... Just draw right out from everything that we've spoken about and like what it is that you do. Like I'm really interested in what today you are most enjoying, the type of motion you're doing, and or the type of projects you're working on, and also kind of maybe what your North Star is. Like with what's life about for you professionally?
I mean, what life is about for me right now is kind of is craft. I think it's taken for me a long time to kind of articulate what that is. And I've been kind of getting into more hobbies and doing more things kind of outside of work that have really exemplified this for me. So that is a pursuit of craft, the idea of doing something and doing it well for just the purpose of doing it well. So pretty much all of my endeavors have led me to this. And so I started riding motorcycle because that is something you must do well to do. Like you have to do it to do it. There's no other way around it. You must do it. And that... when you have command over this machine with your body, it feels amazing. And then I started, getting into improv comedy. You must get on stage and you must do it and you're in the moment. And the only way to do it is to respond to what's happening around you with the skills and the tools that you have. And you can improve them and you can do it better. So craft. Now, in terms of the type of work that I'm doing, some of the better projects I've been doing were some intros for documentaries that have been a lot of fun. So one of them was for the Holiday Inn, the founder of Holiday Inn, who's an eccentric bit of a weirdo. And the thing that was fun about that was it was end to end doing this thing, translating this guy's biography into like 30 seconds at the start of it. And we went through his whole life and figuring out what are the highlights of this that we want to bring forward. And this guy's from a certain time, so we tried to do it very Saul Bass inspired. And this could have been a piece that was very, here's a bunch of photos, we're going through his life, right? Let's not do that. Let's abstract it. They were game to go abstract, Saul Bass this bad boy up, and that we would frenetically go from one scene to the other. It's a lot of manual keyframes. It's a lot of just hold frame stuff, because we're not tweening a lot of things. We're really reducing the frame rate. Like we're going back. We're taking it back. And it was a wonderful project for me because I finally get to flex in a way that I have not been doing a lot, because a lot of what I do is sort of systems and rigs and smoothness and all of these things to make complex things, an array of stuff that has been controlled. This is the pure thing. But that was a beautiful project. I really enjoyed cranking that one out. And then another one after that I was doing was same producer, and we were doing interstitials for someone who was a motivational speaker. So they were a fighter pilot. They encountered a problem. They managed to right the plane instead of ejecting and slash instead of crashing into the North Sea and dying. So instead they did that. And it's all about the stress of that moment and communicating that. At first we were like, hey, God, let's show him in the plane. Like we don't have footage of him in the plane. Like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make it 3D. I'm going to get an F-15 model. I'm going to get, a model of this person, and we're going to go from him going head and shoulders talking to the camera to he's in the cockpit, we're in it. We're going to spin this thing around. It's going to be crazy town. And because we abstracted it in this way, and it's pretty simple stuff. There's not a lot of models going on. It's all black and white. We've taken a lot of the idea of the artifice away. So you really get into how chaotic it is to experience this, because we've gone to this more abstracted form, which is a lot of fun for me because we're doing a few number of shots very well with a very, very realized intention towards this. The intention is not pleasant. It's to make people uncomfortable, which we are doing it. But we had such a set intention, and then we go to that intention and to deploy. People don't ask me to do 3D stuff a lot, so I'm glad that I was able to put that forward and to make that happen. And ultimately, these were two very fun projects that really resonated with the people who watched them. So anyway, those are kind of projects that really resonated with me kind of recently. But most of the stuff I do these days is teaching. So I spent a lot of time kind of consulting and teaching on stuff. I'm doing some consulting on an artist. They're a visual artist, and they want to animate a very kind of personal story of resilience in northern Inuit communities here, and I'm advising them on how best to bring that vision forward, which I'll say really aligns with a lot of my values about what we should be preserving, and it's this way of life that these people want to continue doing and are kind of harmed by climate change and stuff like that. So when the project aligns with the things that you believe in, it feels good to do it. And at the same time, I'm assisting this primarily like a traditional visual artist in new ways of creating and thinking and doing. So that's going to be hopefully very rewarding for everyone involved. Thank you, Canadian government, for the grant money, I guess is what I can say about that. And a lot of the stuff that I do with Kyle Hamrick on the Motion Design Hotline is a lot of fun because we're serving a community and I think making a fun show together. Like he and I just get to nerd out about stuff that we love and the craft that we both deploy all the time. So it's probably the best time here in the middle, I guess. That's what I'm having, I guess.
And you're enjoying the hiatus or stop of YouTube still?
Ooh. Oh, hold on. Say again. My audio just cut out.
All right. And you still enjoying the break from YouTube that you're having? Like that?
Oh, well, good. Yeah. So my YouTube stuff, I kind of stopped creating things on YouTube because it's difficult and it's very alone. And one of the reasons I kind of fell off it was I was developing a course for someone.
Yeah.
And that took all of my attention and all of my distillation of what I really wanted to say.
That you did your videos in as well. There's like there's a great podcast from Boris FX with Evan on it where he goes into this a lot. But like I experience that sometimes at Glide as well. It's like it really does take a lot of I forget the quote from who it was, but it's like I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one. Like your videos are really concise, very to point, but they take a lot of time. But like it would be amazing to see that return one day, even if it's one video a quarter or one video a year. Like, cause
I know, and
great stuff.
The other thing about that is sort of the ideas that I want to put forward in it continue to get more complex. Yeah. Like my favorite type of thing is how do we accomplish this, and I'll do it 3 ways type of idea, right? Well, you've just tripled the amount of labor to do this. And the other thing is,
you do that with Kyle, right? Like
we do, yeah. And I guess that's kind of scratching the same itch, right? Yeah. My desire to put this stuff out there is being fulfilled. And I think the other thing that is difficult is that the taste of what I want to make, I don't think is algorithmically rewarded, right? Because it is long form, right?
Yeah.
And pithy, shorter things are what is most rewarded. I am not scandalous in any way. I am very mellow. I try to output sort of a positivity and a sort of chillness, right, around this stuff.
Uh-oh.
And
One sec.
it is an unpleasant thing to rub up against that, to think that, oh no, I've put the stuff into kind of a void, or that an audience, if my true goal is to get people this information, then I need to rethink what I'm doing to actually put it out there. People are probably better served if I'm able to output things as a series of TikToks, or maybe it would be more serving of the community if I created small reels of stuff. You know, like that's the tension that I get, that my intention is to help the community, that, you know, and leave it better than I arrived to it. And I don't know if long form YouTube video does that as well as I could in other mediums. And I don't know, like right now we're making Motion Design Hotline. I think it's fun and funny to do, and if it sparks something, then we'll pursue that. But I mean, also financially, the YouTube does not pay particularly well, so it's one of these things that like it's hard to justify putting in 30 hours a week on a thing like that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
cool. Thanks, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on a lot. It's been a long episode. I appreciate all of the time and diving deep. If people want to learn more about you and your work, it's evanabrams.com, right?
Yeah. Or ecabrams.com if you want to get to the YouTube channel. That's probably, but you can find me on socials at ecabrams everywhere, and that's probably the best way to get at me. If you have After Effects problems, let me know, and we'll solve them.
All right. See you, man.